Hello, everyone. I'm Lydia Ruth, and I hope you're doing well in your present circumstances and you have great plans for its improvement. I am broadcasting from the front porch of the manse. There's a bit of noise here with some farm equipment passing by in the field, and it's hard to find a good time to get out here, but I have been wanting to sit out here on a nice day. And today I have a program called Homemaking Radio, and it's just to listen to while you work. And some of you might not like this way, but there are plenty of other things you can go to these days. So I'll start out with my one of three things that I do. I know you get a little bored with this sometime, but you can always fast forward it to the middle where I talk about homemaking and to the end where I might talk about people. And I know some people cheat and go to that part. Getting along with people is one of the things that homemakers have to do. They seem to be getting the brunt of a lot of the frustrations of the world as people come into their home or express their own opinions that can be very disturbing. And today I hope that I can do a good job in spite of the noise. There's a tractor going back and forth over there. And I will start with the three things, and the first one is getting started. And whenever I used to hear myself or one of my children say that they just didn't feel, they didn't know what to do, or they didn't feel like doing anything, or they didn't feel motivated, I would check to see. And I'll just use myself as an example. And I think as a mother and a homemaker, it's best to correct yourself first before finding fault with someone else within your realm or your family. And what I noticed about myself, noise. And what I noticed about myself was that if I hadn't followed a little routine or procedure, that I sometimes didn't feel quite like I had any focus. And that's why I developed this little 5-minute 5 things routine so that I could get started. And whenever I heard my children say that they just didn't feel focused or they didn't feel motivated, that I would check to see what they had skipped. Have you had your morning tea? Have you participated in getting yourself bathed and dressed and fixed up so that you feel somewhat present? Have you spent any time in prayer? Have you made your list? Have you done any kind of formal, on-purpose exercise? Now, I used to think that reaching up and getting things out of the cabinet and mopping the floor, sweeping was enough, but I have found such benefits in listening to and following someone on YouTube or somewhere on the web that has a video that does a 2 or 3 minute stretch that will take care of that upper back ache that you sometimes get, or lower back ache, or any other kind of stiffness. And so just do some of these things. And have you read or repeated a good saying or scripture? And whenever any of us was sort of discombobulated, I would check and see that maybe I wasn't fully ready. And I can remember one morning getting up and I was still wearing my night clothes. I got an idea and I wanted to write to somebody, so I was sitting at the table writing, and there was no structure in my day, and I noticed everyone was a little bit on the edgy side from that. So getting dressed no matter what. If you've ever followed Sidetracked Home Executives, which is now Fly Lady, one of the things, they called themselves the Slob Sisters, and one of the things that they decided to do to get themselves out of the mess they were in at home and the feeling of not being focused was getting dressed no matter what. Getting yourself ready no matter what. It's so easy at home to walk into a part of the house, the kitchen, the living room, and then you see something that you'd like to do or read or sit down and do this, and next thing you know, you haven't really gotten prepared. You haven't got a start to your day. And sometimes because of that, women at home who are used to going somewhere else first thing in the morning to a place of, I call it a place of incarceration, they're so institutionalized because someone is directing their every step, and someone is got you on an hour by hour schedule, and you get to feeling comfortable with that, so that you don't learn at home to regulate yourself. And so at home we have to be self-regulating, or what the scriptures call self-controlled. And it is hard, isn't it? You make a list for yourself and you think, why should I obey you? You can't even do what you're told. You can't even if you tell yourself to do it, it's difficult. And it's a very big test of character if you can overcome that. And so if you will develop a routine that you try to follow, there'll be exceptions. You try to follow no matter what. And I've noticed that even on days when I haven't felt really well and maybe had to go back to bed, that when I finally recovered, I would go ahead and start that routine again, even if it was 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And it was so helpful. It's so helpful. And so if you look in the mirror and you're happy with what you're wearing and you feel good in it, that's also part of it. So dress, and I discovered this, you might just have your own discovery. You'll become that one's got a big old-fashioned wooden wagon on the back of it, and it's carrying something. If you have an old-fashioned way of ordering your day, like I like to, you'll become a researcher in your own life and your own home. You start to take note of it. That's what these little notebooks are fun to do, is to catalog how you felt, what you did, what worked, when you were irritated, what you had eaten, what you had done, how you were sitting, what you were wearing. They used to have these day books, where you could write down what you're wearing, what you're planning, what you're thinking, what you're seeing, and those were so good. And it was bringing back some of the sensibilities of the past women who had an eye for detail in their life. And so you become a kind of an experiment for yourself, and you observe that when you are dressed up for the home, now that doesn't mean you wear clothes that are for formal activities, but we've forgotten how to dress up because we're at home. And so I've discovered that I like to sew, so I like to make things for the home. But if you can dress so that no matter what the situation or scene may be that comes upon you, maybe you have to go somewhere, maybe someone's coming for some reason, you dress so that you feel confident, so that no matter what happens, you don't feel like you have to run in the house and change. And I know that the younger people who aren't vital like me, vital just means my vitals are still working. They don't think about that because they absolutely have grown up in clothing that doesn't care, and so they won't be caught wearing something because they don't really care. So they don't have to run in the house and change because they just are the way they are. But I was studying with my ladies' Bible class the other day, and one of the ladies had come across the word garment and garments, and so we were looking it up in the Greek, and we were looking at what circumstances it was used in, and how important it was throughout the scriptures. The word garment and garments were used, and there were certain garments you had to wear to a wedding, and if you weren't dressed in the wedding garments, you were not allowed in. And how many of you remember the first shocking time you went to a wedding and people were coming like just right off the beach and wearing stuff that had nothing to do with the wedding, and the wedding people had gone to so much trouble for this Memorial Day that that it was just sort of disappointing. And but we went through and found different places where garments were mentioned, and what they were just coverings, and or it was also like a mantle. And in the Victorian times they had a garment called a mantle, and it was just something that you put on over your ordinary clothing, and it didn't have sometimes they had sleeves, but sometimes not. It was more like a cape. And so you could do a search on that if you wanted to. What was a garment in the scriptures? And then garment was used as a figure of speech to represent the soul. The garments of salvation mentioned in Isaiah, and garments that were soiled and garments that were not. And so we are in danger of raising a generation that doesn't understand the difference between clean and dirty, and clothes and garments and coverings and different kinds of clothing and what they're all for. But we noticed all through the scriptures that there were different garments for different occasions, and that was very important. That garments also would identify a person as to what kind of life they led and what kind of work they did. And it might be the only time you ever get to really, quote, minister to somebody is without opening your mouth, is with what you wear. And it shows how you feel about life. It shows what you like. It shows your taste. And so, but for the home, it really does set a mood, the way you dress. And I really think you should wear the cleanest, freshest, crispest clothes you could find, and also to be clean, to start out clean. It's like having a fresh canvas. Yes, we have traffic here, but I did want to go ahead and try to do something outside this year. So dress so that no matter what the situation is at home, or maybe you'll be called away from home, or maybe you have to go out to the mailbox. I know a lot of people are fascinated with our mailboxes here, but I think that the most interesting mailboxes I ever saw was in Australia. They turn their mailboxes into everything, into pictures of animals and into houses and fancy objects for the postman to put the mail in. And so even though some of you might have to walk out to the mailbox, there will be somebody walking by, or even the mail carrier will see you. And it's really important. I know back in the 1950s, it was very interesting. It was we think of it as a more formal time in our history, probably because of the media, the magazines, the movies, the pictures, the things that you see from that era. And of course, to get your picture taken, you would always try to look nice or dress up. But there was a trend for the women to go to the grocery store in their robes, and even their curlers. And there was sort of a dumbing down of appearance and of the home, and it gave the home a bad name. And so I'll never forget one time we were looking for a house to buy back in the olden days when you could afford a house, and the realtor took us to several homes, and in one home the woman was just not prepared at all, and she came to the door in her pajamas and showed us through the house, which really wasn't picked up and cleaned up. And then another woman that we went to see, she was prepared, she was dressed up, I think she even had lipstick on, and she was proudly showing us through her house. And of course we don't want to judge people's circumstances, but the impression we give people, also the impression we give ourselves as to how much value we have as people. Remember, we were bought with a price. You can go through the scriptures and find all that, how much value Jesus Christ has for us, and how much we value the situation in which we've been put in. Me with the manse, and you with your house, whatever you name it. And so dress up for it is very important. And the next thing, I think, that someone brought up in this class that was very interesting: when the clothes standards go down for you, then the things you say also might be devaluing. The words you say, the way you speak, the disrespect or respect you have can go down. And then after that, the manners go. Now, in Linda Lichter's book, Simple Social Graces, she had the idea that when the speech changed, now it could be anything, when the speech changed, then the clothing changed and then the manners changed, but they're probably all interrelated. But at home, it's supposed to be a place of stability. So we have to guard our appearance. We have to guard and our children will be watching us. Even a baby knows his mother's clothes and knows how she feels about life and knows, the happiness that she feels. They sense it. They sense it when you're tense and when you are full of anxiety. They sense it. And so we talked about anxiety quite a bit on how it's kind of entered into the home life, and we want to do what we can to regain the love and the peace of home that used to be, and I believe that we can find it. So the clothes, the speech, the way we speak, whatever's good, whatever's lovely, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he, says the scriptures. So then later on, it says, think on the things that are good and lovely. We know that whatever comes out of the heart goes into the tongue. Whatever comes out of the mouth was in the heart in the first place. And that's why Philippians 4:8 is so important. Think on things that are good and lovely and pure and dignified and noble. So there's the clothes, and then there's the speech for the home, and then there's manners for the home. And there's also respect that comes from those manners. Manners creates respect and values, and also it has an effect on how we treat our personal property and how we treat other property and how we treat our own health. And I think it all begins with our bathing in the morning and our appearance. It's like having a brand new life. And that's why I say that when people say, I don't know what to do, or I'm not interested in this or that, have you followed any of this little ritual? Or have you made a ritual for yourself? Have you started out with a prayer and with a new life and with bathing and being grateful for the new day? And these gratefulness journals that people have, they're interesting because you don't get to write down any of your frustrations. You get to write down what you're grateful for. And I had a little book here I wanted to read to you about, and it was McGuffey's Third Eclectic Reader Christian School Edition. If you happen to want these, be sure to get the Christian School Edition, because what they did, every year these McGuffey readers were published again, and things were added and taken out, and then eventually they became secular readers for the public schools and had a lot of what I thought were unnecessary stories and superstition and scary things in them too, but the Christian School Edition is very nice. So I wanted to read this story because I thought this might be a nice play for my descendants. We always like to put on a play, and we don't bother printing out a script and handing it around. These readers often have the names of the person that's speaking, Father and Rose and Father and Brother, and so we just pass this around to whoever's playing whichever character, and we pretend we're putting on a play. We have an enormous amount of enjoyment from that. But I wanted to read this to you because it's the beginning of a gratefulness journal if you don't quite know what to do. And those of you who like to do crafting and mini journals and work with paper and stickers and things like that might enjoy making a journal like this, or making one of those day books or journals about what you're thinking, what you're wearing, what you're going to do, what you're hoping to do, where you're sitting, what you're seeing. I think this is very important because it's a mindfulness. It's a way of paying attention to life instead of, how many of you have headed down the hall in your house thinking about something you need to do and passed by something and didn't even notice it, or set something down and didn't even notice where you set it and lost it, or weren't paying real good attention to the look on your children's face or what they were doing because you were so busy. So we're going to enter into the homemaking part here. And I want to just read this to you because it's part of the preparation. I call it prep for the home. See how it rains. This is the name of this little lesson. It's a reader. And so the words in it that they have to learn and learn to spell and read are daughter, quench, breathes, butter, and thirsty. So it's quite advanced for a third reader. You don't want to use these readers like number 1 is not first grade, number 2 is not second grade. They're more advanced than that. You probably spend a lot more time in the primer for the early years. So this is called Let It Rain. And I was reading it the other day thinking, I might have passed by this had I not just sat down and just read it to see. It's a great training for the parents at home. If you're homeschooling, you're the one that's learning the most. You're the one that's in training, and you're going to learn how to be a good counselor for your kids and how to be wise and how to take back your authority. If you have sent them to other places to be educated, you've given up a lot of your the dependence they have on you. I don't want to call it authority, but the love and dependence and admiration that a child has for you from the beginning, you're giving a lot of it away, and so you have to regain it. And one way to regain it is to know how to handle them when they are discouraged or complaining. So I've learned when I was growing up, of course, our parents in the 1950s, they were quite straightforward, and they didn't try, most of them would just say, oh, be quiet and go do this, oh, that's nonsense, go do this. But I wanted to handle it a little bit different with my children. When a child gets discouraged and gets the blues or cries or gets frustrated, they would just say, that's nonsense, cut it out. And that's okay for some of us, but not all of us. So this is called Let It Rain, and it's about someone who's complaining. See what you can pick up from this as a parent, and even if you're not a parent, it'll help you in some way. Rose, see how it rains. Oh dear, 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 how dull it is. Must I stay indoors all day? I was talking with my older grandson, what would we do for props for this, and what would the rain look like? And we thought about all kinds of things to have a rain background. Father, why, Rose, are you so sorry that you had any bread and butter for breakfast this morning? Does that sound good? Bread and butter and a hot cup of tea? Rose, why, Father, what a question. I should be sorry indeed if I could not get any. Father, are you sorry, my daughter, when you see the flowers and the trees growing in the garden? Rose, sorry? No, indeed. Just now I wished very much to go out and see them. They look so pretty. Father, well, are you sorry when you see the horses, cows, or sheep drinking at the brook to quench their thirst? This is a very agrarian set of books here. Rose, why, Father, you must think I am a cruel girl to wish that the poor horses that work so hard, the beautiful cows that give so much nice milk, and the pretty lambs should always be thirsty. Father, do you not think they would die if they had no water to drink? Rose, yes, sir, I am sure they would. How shocking to think of such a thing. Father, I thought little Rose was sorry it rained. Do you think the trees and flowers would grow if they never had any water on them? Rose, no, indeed, Father, they would be all dried up by the sun. Then we should not have any pretty flowers to look at, and to make wreaths of for Mother. Father, I thought you were sorry it rained, Rose. What is our bread made of? Rose, it is made of flour, and the flour is made from wheat, which is ground in the mill. Father, yes, Rose, And it was rain that helped make that wheat grow. And it was water that turned the mill to grind the wheat. I thought little Rose was sorry it rained. Rose: I think not. I did not think of all these things, Father. I am truly very glad to see the rain falling. Now, all this is doing is showing the old-fashioned way we used to tell our children, or how we were told. We would get kind of dreary, and we wouldn't like something, and they would say, but if it didn't rain so much, it wouldn't be such a beautiful place, or something like that. And we started to understand more about how to handle our own moods and disappointments. And of course, our parents, when we got to where we didn't know what to do, or we looked like we were unhappy, or not engrossed in anything, they were quick to give us something to read. Read this, and then bring it back to me and tell me tell me about it. And it was always something meaningful, not something just to keep us busy like they would in an institution. I want you to read this, to find something that had a purpose in it, in the message. I want you to read this and then come back to me and try to teach it to me like I didn't know. And we turned our children into future teachers. And also give me your other thoughts on it. Tell me what else besides telling me what you read. Tell me what you think about it. What was its value? Was it important? Do you think that other people could use this? Do you think that it would enhance your life in any way? The other thing is, if it gets to where they are not interested, they look bored, is to make sure that their possessions are looked after, their rooms are clean. When we were children, growing up, we had very little, but we knew where it was. We could get up in the night and find something, and we were always very, we enjoyed things like straightening out our closets and drawers and putting things in rows of color or season, or from casual to dress, and we enjoyed keeping our things clean. Back when the 60s came along, people began to get in more of a hurry, and I remember visiting friends who would throw their clothes in a pile because they had to be somewhere at a certain time, and they had to be dressed. And whereas in the slower life, we were taught to take our time with some of that. And in a way, Simple Social Grace's Linda Lichter, she goes through many chapters telling about the home and how it was a religion. The whole home was religion of the heart. It was a worship. It was everything you did was an expression of your love and worship for the people around you and your God. And it was a response to God in a way. And so that everything became religion. Your food was religion. People sat around. If you'll watch that movie, The Magic of Ordinary Days, they had several meal scenes where they were sitting around talking about the food and how the crops went that year and whether it tasted better this year than it did last year or something like that. Everything, they dined. They didn't just eat like people do today. And they had a chapter in here as even house cleaning was part of their religious activity, part of their religious response to their life and to their God. And all of life had a religious, I would say, spiritual aspect to it. And there was something written about houses here I wanted to tell you. And there's a picture here of a house designed by Alexander Jackson Downey, and there was another one that he coordinated with another man with a very similar name, and I think it was Andrew Jackson Davis or something like that. It was Alexander Jackson Downey and Andrew Jackson Davis. They coordinated. They had been architects and for the government, and after a certain downturn in economics, they had not had those jobs anymore, so they turned to designing homes. And these little homes had just a little tiny piece of property had at least one fruit tree and a place for animals of your choice, chickens or whatever, and a little garden. Every home had one of those. And I'll try to include this picture. I have a whole book on these people, and I'll try to include this picture on the blog. Now, if you are listening for the first time, please go. Don't listen to it here on YouTube, because you're going to have a lot of annoying ads, and I didn't put them there. But you can go and click on the link in the description box below and see this whole video without any ads so far. And so then you get to see the other things that I will include that go with this lesson here for homemaking. And the idea is that you could listen to this while you did something else. And so when I talk about Linda Lichter and how she wrote The Simple Social Graces, or The Benevolence of Manners was another title that's used, she talked about almost every section of her book had a spiritual value. So I want to read the description of this house, and it said, an example of a cottage in the Gothic Revival style, designed by Alexander Jackson Davis, featured in A.J. Downing's Guide to Country Homes. Downing noted that the character expressed by the exterior of this design is that of a man or family of domestic tastes, but with strong aspirations after something higher than social pleasures. So even the design of the house meant something more than just living for the day. It was something higher. It was aspire. You might want to look up that word. Strong aspirations. You might want to look up that word and see what that is. That's your assignment. That's your word for today. And it's like saying everyone should aspire, even if a man is not a preacher or an elder in the Lord's church, he should at least aspire to one. In other words, find the qualities of that and bring them into your life. So even cleaning house, she had a section here on cleaning house, how they washed things, and what they used to do in Victorian times had a spiritual aspect to it. And that's the thing that's missing in our lives that makes us weary and well-doing, is when you know there's a spiritual aspect to it, that you're doing it for reasons beyond even the short time you're going to have your children at home, that you're doing it because you are going to influence generation after generation after generation. It takes on an entirely different meaning. And I think that one way to clean house, to get that feeling of spiritual value, is to clean your house with your children alongside of you. Do everything with them. Show them everything. Tell them everything. Tell them where things came from. It's noisy, isn't it? You'd think moving out to the country would mean it would be peace and quiet. But they're very busy during the day. And is to clean it as though you were going to have a house tour. Now, when I was a little girl, my mother read to me about Jesus in the Bible and was telling me all about Jesus. And I had been to someone's house who had a little plaque in her kitchen that said, "Christ is the unseen guest at every meal." And I got an idea that I was just going to clean up my house because Jesus might come today. He might come and see me. And that has comforted me and motivated me forever, because of course, if you've put on Christ and you've obeyed the gospel, He is there in spirit. And I will tell you that if we could clean house as if we are going to have a visitor. I noticed on Fly Lady, she had a little program that she was teaching about how clean it as though you were having company, as though you were going to have a house tour, or as though there was going to be a health inspection, or as though you were going to have to sell it. And of course, that helps too, because we get rid of things, and we realize, or clean house as though you had to move, that these things are very helpful. Now, for those of you who are not used to being home, including children, not used to being home, now they've had to come home and they're having school at home and everything at home, there will be some adjustment. For one thing, we are used to the world making a routine for us. So yeah, we know we have to get up at a certain time, we have to be somewhere at a certain time, and so therefore we adjust all our eating and our getting ready to their schedule. But now that you're home, we have to adjust to ourselves, and we will have to discipline ourselves. We'll be more casual at first, but it will eventually work out. And children particularly, they'll be fussy with each other at first. If they have grown up going somewhere else, going to an institution every day, then they're not around each other, and they're not used to each other. So it will get, and they're not used to being around their mother, and they're not used to being around their father. They're not used to being, families are fragmented first thing in the morning, almost from the time they're born, sent to this institution and that institution. So when we finally come home and decide that home's going to be our base, there will be an adjustment. They're not used to each other, but it will come. And many times people will say, well, I'd keep my kids at home, but they just fight all the time, or they fight with me all the time. That's because they are not used to you're all not used to each other, and we need to become more used to each other, and people will settle down after a while. It's the same as adjustment anywhere. You might not have the same teacher in a school every year and the same students, but you'll get in a new classroom and eventually you adjust and you bond with them. So if they can do that in the public, they can do that at home. Now, I would say that an easy manners lesson for ladies at home, the very most easiest thing you can do is observe the things that other people say and do that are offensive, and just don't do them. And that makes your perfect manners lesson. If you don't like something, or if something someone says or does is demeaning or critical, just don't do it. It makes you a better mannered person. And it's an easy manners lesson if you don't have a manners book or any kind of a guide. And I taught my sons when they had to make a speech in homeschool. I said, what you need to do is observe speakers that you have heard that you don't like, that you can't stand, and observe the mannerisms and the things they do that are very irritating, that you don't like, and observe the fact that some of them can't really get their point across well, and just don't do it. Do not practice those things, and then you'll make a perfect speech. And the other thing I would like to tell homemakers about is, if you're doing anything worthwhile, you're going to be criticized, and people are going to try to waylay you, and they're going to try to get your mind off of it and get you away from it. And so if you weren't doing anything honorable, they wouldn't bother with you. But because you're doing something different, they want, and homemakers especially, this may never happen to you, but homemakers especially, we are not institutionalized by someone outside of the home, and other people think we should be, and they don't like it. It makes them feel bad for some reason. But we want to make sure that we know, when knowledge is just about the most, knowledge is helpful when you know this, the things I've talked about. Then when people do and say things that are rude, you don't feel the stress because you have a deeper knowledge of them and why they're doing it. And for low stress at home, it's hard, but if you feel stress, if you feel any stress, it may be time to go lay down. It may be time to go for a walk. It may be time to go watch your favorite movie, or read a book, or have your cup of tea. And our parents used to do stuff like that. They didn't act like the home was a factory and we have to work 9 to 5 and not quit. They had a lot of leisure time, and they got a lot more done than we do. Because what happens is leisure time, and you need to teach your children how to have productive leisure time, why it's so important to have half an hour a day to an hour where they do nothing, where they just be quiet, do something quiet in their own space, or in a section away from everyone else. Everyone be quiet for half an hour. It replaces good brain cells, and it renews your strength. And so we don't need to go on as though we are trying to that there's going to be police coming and stopping us because we're not producing 8 hours a day. Your homemaking has to go at your own pace, and it depends a lot on the mother's stamina, on her body, and on her response to stress. Now, one thing that even within your own family, there will be people that will tell you that you have a what do they say, that you're insane, or that you have a mental problem, or that you need to be medicated. I don't know if any of you have been ever told that, but if you haven't, and you're just going about your business and you're innocent and everything, and someone tells you that, it can slay you. It can make you sick. It can put you to bed. And that is another thing I told my children. To be a good encourager and to edify, think of the things that people have ever said to you that just knock you over, that just discourage you so much, and don't say them. That's part of good manners. Now, I noticed in visiting with my children and grandchildren, one of the things that we're doing more of is we're listening to good music. And I will give you some links on some good classical music that I like. There was some the other day that I thought, I was listening to it for a while, and then I realized, I think that stiffness in my back has gone away. I think I think I'm feeling really balanced. And we had stopped listening to music years ago, and we got busy, and of course all of our fine stereos had been taken away because there were no more records being sold, and all the old records had gotten warped, and there were no replacements, and so we had just kind of given up on that. And we were listening to some the other day, and it was so beautiful that I think that is so important to include in the Homemaker's Day, that she could listen to a little piece of good classical music, just a small bit of it. If your children aren't used to it, play something every day that's the same, and pretty soon they will like it. And so I wanted to keep telling you too that problems, when you allow problems to come into your home, you distract from your own peaceful living and from the goal of having a peaceful home. People will come in. They will tell you things. Sadly, it's very important that you be careful who you let in your house. And most of the time, I have a table and chair outside, and someone comes that's unexpected, I can meet them outside, because then I don't have to worry about whether I'm going to be able to, if it's someone that has some disturbances that I can't handle, because I'm not. That's another thing you can say, is I am not qualified to handle this problem. I'm not trained in therapy. I'm not trained in whatever. But sometimes, because you're a helpful person, you become a target of someone who just wants to take up your time, or really needs people. And having an outdoor table is nice, because it's right next to the drive where their car is, and they can get up and go when they feel like. But once you get them in your house, you face the problem of maybe having to ask them to leave. And that's why I love a porch and a little place for it outdoors, because you can meet people outdoors if they're not expected. Now, I wanted to say something once more about homeschooling that all of you will be confronted with, and that is, my mom is not experienced, or I'm not experienced, or my husband says I'm not experienced, so I can't be a homeschooler. Look, no homeschooler was ever experienced. There's no such thing. as an experienced mother. There's no such thing. You're not experienced till you have your first child. You're not experienced at homeschooling till you've taught your first lesson. Nobody is experienced. I'm not experienced with your children. Even if someone, because I'm a veteran homeschooler, might come and say, oh, could you homeschool my kids? I would still not be experienced, because I wouldn't be experienced with their children's needs and temperament and talents and abilities and sensitivities. I wouldn't be experienced. So don't worry about that, because the way you get your experience is by doing something. It's like saying, I can't play the piano. Well, of course you can't until you've had a few lessons and practiced. And the children will soon decide whether or not they want to make it successful. And if they're told, you're part of this, you're part of making this home successful, even if you're not homeschooling, they're part of making the family successful. And you know, the Bible says a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. Well, in the scriptures, name meant reputation or authority. And so it's not like you have a name that seems common, or you have a name that seems dignified in the way it sounds. It meant reputation or quality or of character. That's what a good name meant. And so children can help give their family a good name by their good manners. And if they have manners, you have everything. If all you had, and you had a family, and even if you weren't homeschooling, if all you had was manners, or a good book on manners, or you wrote the manners, you would have everything, because manners would mean they would have the love of each other in the home. That's part of being courteous. And they'd be kind and loving to each other. And manners would mean they would be good socializers, because they would know how to say hello, I'm fine, goodbye, and thank you for inviting me. And they could socialize with any age group. They could socialize with the elderly, and they could socialize with babies, and they could socialize with everything. So manners gives you your socialization. If all you had was a book on manners or a course in manners, manners would give you a good appearance, because you'd be thinking about others, what they have to look at, and manners would give you good health too, because and cleanliness, because manners would mean that you respect people enough, respect yourself enough, respect your home enough, respect God enough to be clean and to be kind and to speak well. Manners would give you good speech habits. Manners would make you a good worker. Manners would give you honesty. Manners would give you ambition and motivation, because you would have to, in order to show manners or courtesy for your own body and your own mind and your own self and other people, you would do this. Manners also gives you peaceful living, teaches you to be peaceful and not argumentative. And manners would also make you take care of your own things. You'd be neat and tidy. You'd be a good housekeeper, homemaker, homekeeper. Manners would be the source of everything is manners, and the source of manners is love. So if all you had was a good manners book for yourself and for your children, you could probably get along pretty well in life, even without much money, because well-mannered people find favor in many ways with other people. Now, I talked about how manners would make you peaceful. And in the home, there'll always be somebody, maybe it's in the home or just a relative or a friend or something, who just wants to argue. And sometimes even a wife will, all she'll have to say is, the washing machine is making a funny noise. Do you think I should call somebody to repair it? And somebody in the family might say, well, I don't want to argue about it. And it's just a way of shutting you down. It's just a way of dismissing you. And you could find the nicest thing to say, and they would argue about it. They would somehow give you a blunt answer. And so in this way, if you've got somebody like that around, just lessen the amount of words that you speak around such a person if they tend to be argumentative. Do as much as you can by yourself and remain silent. Get things done in different ways without involving them because they tend to argue. Um, Now, when I talk about manners will give you a good appearance and give your children good appearance and dress well, remember what who were the women in Wives and Daughters that Molly liked to go visit that were in her village? The Miss Brownings, and one of them found out that Cynthia, Molly's stepsister, had gone to London to shop and other things, to stay with some relatives, and she said, well, in my opinion, London is just a pickpocket dressed in respectable clothes. So let's remember that. We can fool a lot of people dressed in respectable clothes, but the manners and the speech and the attitudes have to go with it. Now, if in any case, if there is any distress in the home, please remember to stay. You're better off to stay with it and stay in the home than to drive off and disappear somewhere. You never know. There's a lot of people that disappear because they got emotional about something. They got in their car, they drove away, went to a store or something, and just disappeared. So we've got to really be safe. And not get too emotional when if people start in on you or are pressuring you in any way. I am not saying this to scare away future homemakers. This happens anywhere, in any job, in any school, in anything where you can get very discouraged. And it's best to keep your head about you, stay with your goals, and homemakers should have goals. I've got I'll just show you my list for today. There, and if you notice, I've got like 12 things, and I've just checked off maybe 3 or 4 of them because everything that is a pile of corn going by. Now, I want to read a little bit out of this book here, Cottage Core, and I've told you about this before, but I really think you could write one for yourself. What it is just a book divided into seasons and all the little things you can do seasonally for just let me just read the introduction and you'll understand what I mean. It's just little things that we can do to observe life in the season, and also I believe they're great stress buffers. They keep the stress will always be out there. It was in Christ's time, but we can have less of it. And this is the introduction to Cottage Core. It's inspirational ideas, crafts, and recipes for wholesome country living by Daisy Oakley, and she's in England, I believe. Like so many movements, cottagecore gained popularity through social media, but in reality it exists far from technology amongst sprawling meadows and wild gardens. It is a trend that allows all, regardless of gender, age, race, or sexuality, to indulge in traditional visuals reminiscent of a simpler time. She writes a little bit like Linda Lichter. Born of a desire to return to a slower way of living, it is a movement that revels in the romance of rural life and celebrates a pastoral fantasy. Think of soft, sun-faded aprons and the scent of freshly baked bread, and you're halfway there. Well, that was what Linda Lichter was saying when she wrote her book in the 1990s, was that all of life was romantic. Everything, even your work, had a sense of romance in kind of a spiritual way. And so she says, if you're looking to live a life that evokes the countryside dream, but reside far from the wilderness, fear not. The wilderness can be quite dangerous. So if you have a little house somewhere that's not in the country, you can just create country around you just by, like I've always wanted a Victorian house. Well, I got myself some Victorian ornamental things that go on a house that looked like gingerbreadish type looking things that made it more Victorian architecturally. If you're looking to live a life that evokes the countryside dream but reside far from the wilderness, fear not. It's never been simpler to evoke dreamy homestead vibes. No matter where you live, from wholesome recipes and craft ideas to activities to bring you into harmony with nature, let the suggestions in these pages help you disconnect from modern life and live the cottagecore fantasy. Now, core means heart. Whenever you see the word core written in relation to anything, it just means heart, cottagecore. Uh, and someone should do homestead core. Someone should do poverty core. It's really a lot of fun. And each of you could make a little book of your own. Just tie it with string or ribbon and start putting things in there to do that's seasonally or things you have done. You know, when we leave this life, what we leave to the next generations, well, the things that we do other than leaving something written are not going to be as meaningful or as useful to them. For instance, you could have won a medal in a spelling bee, but it would have been better to write down the words that you spelled so they can see how you won it. You could have won a prize for a car race, but it would be better for you to write down something about life that they could read, and the things that we leave. And Linda Lichter talked about how they left their crochet and their knitting and their samplers with the alphabet stitched on it, and their paintings and things like that. And that's what some of this is, right? But you could write your own. You could just do your own. Now, before I leave, I'm going to read a poem written by Edgar A. Guest. He was an Englishman that came to America after a war, and I think it was probably in the 1930s. I'm trying to think. I'm thinking it was in the 1930s, but I am not sure. But it was a time also when things were changing as far as shopping was considered, and the way people bought things. You used to stand, and I remember this. Do you remember this? Those of you who are vital, stand at the counter and point to something and get them to put it on, and it could be a can of beans or a can of canned milk or something, and you'd point to something and they'd put it all there for you in a box, and then they would bring it up on the cash register. You pay for it. Well, it was later on that they stocked things so you could go down the aisles and put them in your own cart. And also the attitudes of the merchants had to change too, because people did not want to shop in places where they were not, where there wasn't courtesy or politeness. And so this poem that he wrote was so interesting, and it makes me realize that this is the thing. Part of our stress is coming from being around rudeness. It can really get into your head, and it can really debilitate. You really need a strong cup of tea after you've been rude to, and it really does suck the life out of you. And he wrote this poem about shopping, and it says here, it's called Good Business, and this is this idea of good business created a new thinking about how to be nice to people who gave you their business and helped you earn your living. I can remember back in the olden days, you'd go into a shop, and the person that ran the shop acted like they didn't want any of that stuff to go, that they didn't want to part with it, and they didn't want you to buy it. They acted like they didn't like the customers, and if the customers came in, you could just about draw a cartoon of, uh-oh, here comes some customers, now we'll have to work. Or we'll have to quit talking now and work. And so this is good business, but I think it's a good poem for the home and for anything you're trying to do, churches, anything. If I possessed a shop or store, I'd drive the grouches off my floor. You see, this is great for the home. You usually need to read this to your children and make up a poem yourself about the home. If I possessed a shop or store, I'd drive the grouches off my floor. I'd never let some gloomy guy offend the folks who came to buy. I'd never keep a boy or clerk with mental toothache at his work, nor let a man who draws my pay drive customers of mine away. The reason people pass one door to patronize another store is not because the busier place has better silks or gloves or lace, or cheaper prices, but it lies in pleasant words and smiling eyes. The only difference, I believe, is in the treatment folks receive. Now, Edgar Guest had come from England and set up his life in the USA, and he worked for a newspaper. And his job was to scout around for human interest stories and things. The old papers, as I remember, some of you who are vital remember, the papers, the local papers, had things like that in it. Like they have a recipe from Mrs. Brown down the road, and it would have maybe a pattern in there that you could copy or buy, and it would have a poem or a story called Human Interest. And the effort to find these things was quite taxing, and he discovered that maybe he could write himself. So he started writing his own poems to put in there. And I just love this poem here. If I possessed a shop or store, I'd drive the grouches off my floor. The one thing that we enjoyed when we were growing up is playing store. We would set up a little shop and a customer would come. And of course, we had bad examples sometimes for the proprietors. Sometimes the merchants were not very well mannered and treated the customers pretty badly. And we would pretend that we weren't pleased with the customer and that they didn't have enough money, and we would cut money out of cardboard and paper and play like that. Now, some of you have asked about my book, Just Breathing the Air. It's just a story that my mother and father and I wrote about growing up in Alaska, about my childhood, and I was the oldest of 7 kids, and there's lots of beautiful color pictures in there of all of us and of our homestead and of the house and everything. And if you want that book, don't go to the printer, because they have online given it such an exorbitant price, and we have had such a hard time getting that where you could order it. So, but I can order it at the cost of the printing, and it's about rounded off about $30 to have it printed. And so if you will write to me on my email and send me your name and address if you want one. It has very good values in it. It has a lot of scripture in it. It might be suitable for homeschool. It might be suitable for an elderly person who is housebound. They might just love learning about seeing the old pictures and the old ways. To me, it's good for everybody. Good for a child to read too. And so you would send me your name and address, tell me you want it, and then I will order it from the printer, and it will go to your house from the printer. And then you would go to my PayPal after you got it, and put the $30 in there. But or else you could write me a check for $30 and send it to my address. But we could work it out. But I like to get the book to you first before you pay for it, just in case I forget. So, ladies, I hope that this has done you good today, and that you got a lot done while you were listening, and that it makes everybody feel more content. One thing you can do with your children is study the word contentment. And there was a woman named Phyllis Wheatley. She was a slave girl in America, and she was a household servant, and the person that she lived with, and I don't know what state it was in the 1800s, knew that she had the ability to be a poet, and she coached her and she helped her, and they published a book, and she had a poem. She had several poems about contentment, and so did the blind woman Fanny Crosby. She wrote many poems and songs. Here we go. That truck is carrying fuel in a big round cylinder, and it's green. Fanny Crosby wrote, "Oh, what a happy soul am I, although I cannot see, to weep and sigh because I'm blind." She said, how many folks I know who something about that, but she said, I will not weep and sigh because I'm blind. And so there are so many people worse off, and we used to do that. Our parents would tell us when we got discontent, there are some people worse off than you, and describe it. And so but I think it's also good to point someone forward and say, what can you do to make yourself more productive, content, happy, creative? And it's possible that people who are bored at home are not creative enough with what they have to do. So ladies, I hope that you will go to the blog and listen to this there and leave your comment on my blog. And I love you, and I want to implore you to stay close to Christ, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.